All right, tonight on The ReidOut.
Replacing George this week is my chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg. And you think George is tough? Wait till you see Alan.
Mr. Weisselberg, how do you feel, sir? Are you going to testify against Trump?
My, how things have changed for Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg. From a guest spot on The Apprentice to a sentence of 5 months in prison for his role in a tax scheme. Also tonight, the judge who approved the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago says he's inclined to release some of the search warrant affidavit. Meanwhile, that same judge is facing anti-Semitic threats from Trump's MAGA followers as Trump cashes in on the FBI raid, ranking millions of dollars. Plus, frightening reports from Ukraine that Russia may be planning a false flag disaster at a Ukrainian nuclear reactor complex. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tiffany Cross, and tonight for Joy Reid. And we begin with new developments in the former president's many legal troubles, starting in a Florida courthouse. Now, a federal judge said he's inclined to unseal some of the affidavit used to justify the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, with Justice Department reactions that it won't undermine its investigation. Now, Judge Bruce Reinhart, who approved that search warrant, cited intense public interest responding to the request from several media organizations, this one included, to release the document. And the Justice Department has until next Thursday to submit redactions. Now, a top counterintelligence official with the department, Jay Bratt, he argued that the investigation is in its early stages and that releasing the affidavit could jeopardize several witnesses. Now, a spokeswoman for the former president said afterward that it should be released unredacted. But it is worth noting that while his attorney, Christina Bobb, was in court, Trump did not submit a motion to unseal the document. In the meantime, NBC News has learned that the FBI team is still sifting through the seized documents 9 days later, separating documents covered by attorney-client privilege and material not relevant to the investigation. But you know what is clear? The probe into those top secret classified documents will hang over the former president for a while, just like all his other legal troubles. Let's get into those. Today, in a New York court, the former chief financial officer for the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, pleaded guilty to 15 felonies and admitted that he conspired with the Trump company in a scheme to avoid paying taxes on special off-the-books perks. Weisselberg will serve 5 months in prison under a plea deal requiring him to cooperate with the prosecutors and testify about Trump Organization business practices at a trial starting in October. Now, without the deal, he faced up to 15 years in prison. There's also the ongoing Justice Department investigation into the January 6th and efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The New York Times reports that a grand jury subpoena was issued to the National Archives in May for all the documents provided to the House January 6th committee, noting that the request suggests that the DOJ may be following the committee's lead and prosecutors believe evidence of a crime may exist in the documents they turned over to the panel. Now, it's important to note that this subpoena is not related to the separate investigation into classified documents and the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. But Trump has so many legal exposures at this point, it's seriously, truly hard to keep count. Let's bring in some brilliant legal minds who can help me with that. Joining me now is Katie Phang. She's the MSNBC legal analyst and host of the Katie Phang Show on MSNBC and Peacock, also my friend. And the brilliant Joyce Vance. She's a professor at University of Alabama School of Law and a former U.S. attorney and quite the dog mom. Happy to have you both. Let's start off with you, Joyce. I want you to explain to our audience why all of this matters. And we can start with the judge who's apparently inclined to unseal part of the affidavit. Is that a good idea?
So that's a good place to start, Tiffany. This is a surprise, I think, and people who are career federal prosecutors expected the judge to keep this motion, this search warrant affidavit, entirely under seal. So now the fight begins to see just how much of it will be released. But cut to the chase, the bottom line here is nothing good happens for the former president if parts of this affidavit are released, because what they will establish is the probable cause that DOJ had to search his personal office at Mar-a-Lago. This really cuts against the grain for federal prosecutors. They like to protect their investigations. And the DOJ argued here that giving the public a roadmap could possibly cause witnesses to be intimidated, could permit people who were interested in short-circuiting this investigation to do so. But ultimately, the judge, and it may not stay in the hands of this magistrate judge, his ruling likely to be appealed to a district judge and perhaps even further up. At the point in time where the affidavit is delayed, that will be some weeks, if not months, down the road. And ultimately, it won't be very nice for the former president.
I don't think any of this would be very nice for the former president, which brings me to the New York Times, Katie. Now, the DOJ subpoenaed the same White House documents they handed over to the January 6th committee, with the implication being that that's evidence of a crime. Your take on that latest New York Times reporting?
Well, it's always important to know when the DOJ is making a move, because we're always critical about the transparency that comes from the DOJ, which I am always fond of saying is the biggest law firm in the world with limitless resources and enough people to be able to throw stuff at and always have something to be combated. And so when we know that the DOJ is making moves that we're not aware of, it obviously raises eyebrows and makes us wonder why. The key message is the one that you had in the beginning of the segment, which is the fact that this investigation and that subpoena is totally unrelated to the one that we're talking about right now, which deals with the classified documents and the mishandling of them by Trump at Mar-a-Lago. So the fact that we have yet another parallel investigation that's being conducted, of which we are now made publicly aware, and the fact that the subpoena happened back in May leads us to believe that perhaps the DOJ, Merrick Garland at the helm, is a little bit farther ahead than maybe we've given him credit for, and that Trump is underestimating him for.
Yeah, he's been quite methodical. And I will say I was one of those people saying WTF when it came to the DOJ. So it is interesting to see how this is all played out. I don't mind eating a little crow when we have to, when justice prevails. Joyce, let me ask you, because before we move to Weisselberg, the fact that Trump is kind of pretending that he wants the affidavit unredacted, again, his lawyers were in court. They didn't ask for that. They didn't make that move, which leads me to believe, is this all a publicity stunt? Because if he's saying, no, release everything, knowing that they may not release it, then it makes him look innocent to his millions of sycophants and blind followers. But do you think there's a chance that he actually does want the affidavit released unredacted?
Well, he doesn't know what's in the affidavit, but he knows that it got federal law enforcement into Mar-a-Lago, into his home. So if he's thinking logically, and I think if is doing a lot of work in this sentence, but if he's thinking logically, he will appreciate that it's not in his best interests to have the detailed evidence that DOJ put together in this search warrant affidavit released. And Tiffany, something that we would do well to focus on here is that unlike the January 6th investigation, where we really don't know who the targets of that investigation are, it seems likely that they're looking at the former president, but we don't know for certain. In this case involving classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, we know that Trump is at least a subject, if not a target, in this search, in this investigation, because of the fact that one of the places they specifically obtained permission to search was his personal office. The entire warrant was couched in terms of places where he and his staff had access. It seems like a very direct line towards the former president. And if he's thinking logically, he won't necessarily want evidence connecting him to purloined documents that should be retained in a secure fashion. He won't want that connection made for everyone in the public to see.
I mean, the key word, if he's thinking logically, I agree, if he's doing a lot of work there. I want to move to Weisselberg, who, as you know, cut a plea deal. He's saying that he's not going to implicate Donald Trump in his testimony. Michael Cohen is saying, we don't believe you. You need more people. Take a listen.
So I disagree with that, and I'll tell you why. They're going to ask him questions, and they already know the questions that they want to ask, and the questions that they're going to ask, if he answers them truthfully, which if he doesn't, he's really a fool, because he is looking at spending the rest of his life behind bars, will ultimately implicate other people, not just Donald, but other people at the Trump org and in their business circles as well.
Yeah, I mean, Weisselberg is in his 70s. He was looking at 15 years. Katie, do you think that he would risk more time? I mean, he's already got this plea deal. Do you think that he will implicate Donald Trump in his testimony?
You know, Tiffany, we were always holding out, looking to see whether or not Weisselberg would be willing to flip against somebody like Donald Trump. Consider the following, though, and Joyce, I know, would agree with me as a former prosecutor as well. He had the option of going to trial. He said no. He's been offered this plea deal, but think about it. He could have maybe taken a plea deal that just involved him going to prison, and that is it. But he has his plea and his 5 months in jail at Rikers contingent upon him providing truthful testimony at the trial in October of the Trump Organization. To Michael Cohen's point, you cannot put a company in jail. The company is operated by humanoids, by people. There have to be people that were doing the wrongdoings at that company, and it was not just Allen Weisselberg. So Allen Weisselberg has the pressure to have to implicate people, maybe including Donald Trump, when he testifies at that trial in October. And we know that Donald Trump was the head of the Trump Organization up until 2017. The indictment for Allen Weisselberg starts as far back as 2005. And so by default, you're going to have a huge net cast of different names that is not just Allen Weisselberg going into this trial in October.
And you know, what you just said, Katie, makes me wonder, because even if he's saying he won't implicate Donald Trump, Joyce, what does that mean for Jared and Ivanka and other people who were a part of the Trump Organization or affiliated or in the periphery of the Trump Organization? Also, what information do you think that Weisselberg might offer?
Yeah, so this is a very confusing plea agreement, I think, for many prosecutors. And Katie points to some of the elements of it that could lead us to wonder what exactly is going on here. In the federal system, when folks plead guilty and cooperate, they have to disclose all of the information that they have about anyone, no matter who it is. They don't get a carve-out. That's not necessarily true in these state prosecutions, particularly in the Manhattan DA's office, where they have a little bit more latitude when they cut deals. But what's confusing here is the fact that Weisselberg is willing to testify against the organization, but reportedly not against Trump. And there's so much identity there between the two that it would seem almost implicitly, if he's discussing these beneficial financial deals that he got, the logical question is, who authorized that?